Welcome again to State of the World. This edition, The World in Context with Ambassador Charles Shapiro. I want to welcome you here today, Charles. And I also want to say that we are doing this in conjunction with the World Affairs Councils of Pittsburgh, the World Affairs Council of Cincinnati and Kentucky, the World Affairs Council of San Antonio. We also have leaders joining us, leaders and members joining us from around the country, from Santa Fe, from Western Michigan, from Orange County. And I think all the councils that are joining us today, all the leaders that are joining us really speak to the fact that you, Charles, have been a true leader and a guiding voice for the network for the past several years. Since you joined the World Affairs Council. Especially, you've been such a steady voice during really difficult times. And I want to thank you for that up front. And I want you to know how grateful all of us are for your leadership.
Thank you, Megan. I'm flattered. I'm flattered that anybody wants to hear what I have to say. So
I am really looking forward.
I didn't have the opportunity to say it.
Well, this is really great. And so, you know, the end of the year is such a time for reflection, right? To look back. And we know that while this isn't going to be your last appearance on State of the World, it is going to be your final appearance as the president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. So we have this opportunity to take a look today at where we stand in the world. So I just really want to jump in, if that's okay.
Sure.
So when we look at where we are, as we sit here today, as we look at the global landscape, can you describe where we are? What's going on?
Well, first of all, we need a little bit of humility. You know, who a year ago would have predicted, major civil war in Ethiopia, that Lebanon would be in the fix that it is right now, that the Biden administration would be stumbling, trying to, get its bearings in the world, that we would have had that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. So anything we predict now, I mean, it's a prediction and it is bound to be off. So let me answer your question. I'm going to do it as shortly as I can, is that, first of all, COVID is not going away as a factor. We had hoped that vaccines and everything would take care of it. And, even in the countries with super high vaccine rates, of this new Omicron variant is really affecting how we are going to be able to interact. Secondly, we have, I think this is really important, we've reestablished good relations with our ally, we the United States, and I think that's hugely important. I mean, just hugely important to do that. But now we've got to figure out what to do with it. Saying we're the leaders isn't the same as being a leader. China's increasingly aggressive actions towards Taiwan are a huge matter of concern and something that we all need to keep a real eye on. We need to figure out Russia. I mean, that Russia's got, I think it's 180,000 troops on the Ukraine border is, scary. What are they up to? What are they going to do? Climate change. And we just had those tornadoes that ripped through the middle part of the United States, killed so many people in Kentucky, and we had these huge wildfires and droughts. I mean, that's, you don't think of that as a foreign policy issue, but it is a foreign policy issue. And COP26 is, it's just a baby step. And the other issue we've got to worry about is cybersecurity. Anyhow, I'm gonna leave it there. So that's what we need to worry about. And those forces that are shaping the world.
Absolutely. So when we look back at 2021, right? As you said, like no one could have predicted a lot of these things that have happened that are going on today. But if we look back at 2021, can you talk about some of the significant milestones that happened that are setting up the world, that are causes and forces for what's happening today?
Wow. What? That's a good question. Well, look, I mean, a year ago, we were all talking about North Korea, right? And we weren't paying attention to Taiwan. And when we should have been paying attention to Taiwan. A year ago, we were worried about Russia and Ukraine. I mean, we knew Russia was a difficult country. I mean, these are all things we've got to pay a lot of attention to. And but here's what I'm going to stop for a second, is we in the US, our politics, our social media, make us look at the world as if every question is a binary, right? That there's a right and wrong, that there's, if you do this, it will solve it. If you do that, it won't solve it. And all of us, everybody on this Zoom knows that's just absolutely not true. It's not true when you're dealing with your own family. It's not true when you're dealing with your next door neighbors. And it's certainly not true when you're dealing with international relations. And so we have that discourse oversimplifies the world. And the world's not simple. It always tease my son because every question I ask him, his answer starts with, well, it's complicated. But the fact is, it is complicated. And international relations are complicated. Public policy is complicated. Dealing with sovereign nations is complicated. And I think we have a very hard time in the United States understanding the most basic thing in international relations, which is sovereignty. The countries can do what they want. So it's not up to us to tell them what to do.
So I have a question from the audience, and it regards something that happened in 2021. So we started off the year here in the United States with January 6th, right? With the incidents that happened at the Capitol. And as someone who has served as, the chief spokesperson for the United States in several countries, how do you see January 6th impacting, the U.S. foreign, just a light question, Charles, U.S. foreign policy abroad?
Well, that was like, as I typed up some notes for this, I was going to end talking about that. I think it's hugely disturbing. Think of the irony of President Biden hosting a summit with the Summit of Democracies, right? When we, for the first time in my professional career, our democracy is at risk. And I really believe that's the case. And so, our ability to talk about, flaws in other countries when we've got the flaws ourselves. Let's face it, we had something that was insurrection, certainly pretty close to a coup attempt. Maybe it was a coup attempt as more information's coming out, and that we don't even want to talk about it. A large portion of the population doesn't want to talk about it. I live in Georgia. We have a very conservative governor, and who's a Republican, and we've got gubernatorial elections in the year. And another Republican just announced he's going to a primary challenge against a sitting governor.
Yeah, the former senator.
The former senator, and his campaign is based on that the governor somehow didn't do what he was supposed to do by certifying the election. It's just, and the guy who's running against him, this former senator, is somehow claiming that there was something wrong with last year's election. It's like, I'm waiting to see some of the debates start on this. And that's what we're talking about. So if we can't understand ourselves, how can we understand the world? We can't understand what's going on in our country. And our country is weakened by that. Clearly, both domestically and internationally. We have prided ourselves, certainly since the end of the Second World War, as being the leader for, democratic capitalism, right? That's what makes our country great. And it's real time to be real worried about our own country.
It's sobering to think about, isn't it? So I know you mentioned some of the big hotspots. We know what's happening with Russia and in Ukraine and China and Taiwan, but are there other sort of hotspots around the world that we need to look out for in the coming years? Maybe things that don't rise to the top of the news, but that may be cause for instability or cause for paying attention to, that might not be the biggest thing we hear about.
There are loads of them. That's it's always the case. Every year it seems worse. And people always wring their hands. We're not paying attention. But let me put it in a more general way. I mean, the number of military coups the past year, I think, was up in Southeast, in Burma, Myanmar, in a number of countries in Africa. You had fake elections that are essentially a coup. I mean, very bizarre in Nicaragua and Venezuela. So there's a whole bunch of places around the world that we really need to be paying attention to. And the tragedy for them is they don't make it into either U.S. media or certainly the president's inbox, right? Because they're not the crises that threaten the U.S., but they are the crises that, when you add them up together, make the world less stable and more threatening. And now I got to, sort of change the topic a little bit. What we're not paying enough attention to is India. I mean, there's the opportunity that we're not paying attention to. And frankly, I think the last administration paid more attention to India than the Biden administration is. I mean, there are huge opportunities for the United States. Huge opportunities if what we're trying to do is counterbalance China. And I think we need to pay way, way more attention to India.
What about Afghanistan? Can you talk a little bit about the situation in Afghanistan? I know online this week there's been a lot of attention on the fact that there's a lot of prediction that Afghanistan's about to collapse, and so what should we do?
Well, first of all, turn on NPR. I mean, they've got some great analysis of it this morning. Seriously, they've got a level of detail that Afghanistan is bankrupt and the economy's collapsing and people are starving. And I mean, really what that in many ways is a product, obviously a product of bad governance and the Taliban and all that, but we are exacerbating it because that's what economic sanctions do. Economic sanctions around the world, they're important and there are times when you want to use them, but you also have to remember that economic sanctions hurt the people of a country, and the leadership of a country, they always live pretty well. They've got enough to eat, right? Their electricity's on when everybody else's is off. They've got water when nobody else can get water. And so Afghanistan is a mess, and it's getting worse very, very quickly, and people are on the verge of starving to death. And the winter in Afghanistan it's a serious winter. And so we've got real problems there. And we have to figure out first of all, we have to understand what's going on. And second, we have to figure out what to do about it. And I just saw on LinkedIn where some people, former U.S. diplomats who served in Afghanistan are raising money to try to get money and to help the people of Afghanistan. But the U.S. banking system won't transfer money to Afghanistan because of those very sanctions. And foreign banks are afraid that if they send money to Afghanistan, they'll somehow get banned in the U.S. banking system. So, I mean, there's a lot to look at and a lot to unpack. And part of it is we need to think about, well, what is our response? What's our responsibility in this country where we were involved for so long, and then we left it. We walked away. We cut off their access essentially to the world banking system, and we cut off their access to their money that's deposited in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Absolutely.
And we did it for good reasons. It's not like we did it capriciously. We did it for good reasons.
Excellent. So we have, I want to encourage anyone who has questions for Ambassador Shapiro to put them in the Q&A. So please go ahead. I know that there's several in the chat that are making their way to the Q&A. So Charles, we just spoke about India and then we spoke about Afghanistan. What about Pakistan? What kind of concerns do we have about what's happening in that region?
Okay, first of all, I'm not an expert on Pakistan, so you can find somebody who knows more than I do. But I do know this is that Pakistan, pardon me, is unstable. The nation is increasingly allied with China because China's offering money and building roads in Pakistan. Good. How would you turn that down if you were the president of Pakistan? And then, there's real questions about who runs Pakistan, the president or the intelligence service. Okay, all that's bad enough. But what makes it worse is that Pakistan and its enemy, arch enemy, India, both have nuclear weapons. And so that's the concern. I mean, if you had to pick a place where there might be an exchange of nuclear weapons, that just might be it. And so, should we be concerned about governance in Pakistan? Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues to be concerned about. But the thing that makes people more concerned about Pakistan than you are about, similar issues in, governance issues in another country is that Pakistan's got nuclear weapons.
Let's move to an area of the world which you know extremely well. And so let's talk about Venezuela for a second, because, in prior years, there's been a lot of news about what's happening in Venezuela, and we haven't heard a lot lately. So can you talk to us about what's happening just south, not too far from you, south of Georgia?
Well, Venezuela is important to us in a whole bunch of ways, including, I don't know about Connecticut, but certainly here in Georgia, we've got more and more Venezuelans here. Again, Venezuelans are crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Venezuelans are getting here any way that they can. I mean, Venezuela is a country with 30 million people, 6 million of whom have fled the country. It's just extraordinary, right? So that's a fifth of the country has left. So that's the equivalent of 60 million Americans leaving the U.S., right? A fifth of the country has fled the country. The reason you don't hear about it is because what's the nose? It goes from bad to worse every day. If there's any good news, it's that people have just stopped trying to use the local currency and the economy is essentially dollarized. And I saw this really odd article the other day that there's a whole bunch of people who are becoming fintech experts in Venezuela because they have to. They don't have a choice, right? And so they're trying to, develop ways that you and I could spend money, can spend dollars, because the economy doesn't work. The currency is useless. Retail stores won't accept your local currency. So how do you feed yourself? How do you feed your family? And that there's surprisingly that there's people are becoming fintech experts in Venezuela. Wow, how's that? And then there's all sorts of regional issues of having. We think we've got Venezuelans showing up in the U.S. They've got over 1 million Venezuelans are in Colombia, stressing this, the social services, the school system, the hospitals, the medical system of the country, and in Brazil, and in Peru, and in Chile, and in Ecuador, and all through Central America. So it is a destabilizing factor. If there's anything that's, interesting is, add into that is that Venezuelans, certainly 20 years ago, were always thought, well, we are so important because of the oil. They're actually, the influence of their oil is insignificant now. We don't import their oil. The spike in oil prices is caused by a lack of oil coming from Venezuela. It's like it's become an irrelevant factor in many ways.
So let's talk a little bit about, do you see growing influence of China in South America? Is that cause for concern?
There's growing influence of China everywhere, including in Europe, including in Africa, including in South America, including in Southeast Asia. And yes, of course, it's a cause for concern. It's not like the government of China is getting the government of Brazil to do stuff differently than it would have, or Chile or Colombia, but China is the largest trading partner of almost every country in Latin America. And there are an increasing number of Chinese companies, Chinese construction companies bringing workers from China to Africa, to Latin America. And yeah, we ought to be concerned. Look, the Chinese economy is growing faster than the US economy. Everybody knows that. At some point in the next few years, the Chinese economy will overtake the US economy. And we know that with economic influence comes political influence. And so how is that going to be manifest? And okay, we want to compete with China. We want to cooperate with China, but we also need to be concerned about China. And the concerns about China are, among others, I mean, China is rapidly expanding its nuclear forces. China is spending its defense budget specifically to invade Taiwan. I mean, that's what, you can see from their purchases what they're intending to do, right? Is sink US aircraft carriers and invade Taiwan. So is that some, and I remind everybody, we do not have a defense treaty. And Taiwan is not an ally of the United States. And for the past, I don't know how many years, our policy's been strategic ambiguity. And that is that we never say we're going to come to their defense. We never say we're not going to come to their defense. But here's the United States, which, whether the withdrawal was good or not, America was very tired of being involved in Afghanistan. So, are we ready for what might happen with China and Taiwan? It's an article of faith for this Chinese government and the previous Chinese government and the next Chinese government that Taiwan is an integral part of China. It should become part of China. And the question is, do they wait? Are they patient, or do they accelerate that? And certainly the events in Hong Kong over the past year, right? Have to cause real concern, where the idea of one country, two systems turns out not to be true.
Right. So do you think it's an inevitability that China is going to take Taiwan?
I mean, and forever is a long time. So, I can't really answer your question. I mean, Taiwan's got an economy that's growing rapidly. It's a high-tech economy. GDP per capita is growing rapidly. Taiwanese increasingly feeling themselves as Taiwanese. And, back, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, Taiwanese thought of themselves as mainland Chinese in exile in Taiwan. And I think that is dissipating very quickly, if it still exists at all. And they're an economic powerhouse, and with good government, it's a good business environment, a great place to invest. They do well. I think they're ranked highest in the Freedom House report of all the East Asian nations. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do, U.S.? What are we going to do in Ukraine? We don't have a treaty alliance with Ukraine either. They're not a member of NATO. Are we willing to go to war in Ukraine if it comes to that?
It's a good question, and that leads me to a question just from Michael Vanderpool. So Michael has a 2-point question. So maybe I think you just answered his question on Ukraine, but I think I'm asking this correctly, Michael. You want to know what Ambassador Shapiro thinks is the #1 U.S. foreign policy priority in the world. What the most important thing that's happening, today that would impact the average U.S. citizen?
I think it's got to be China. I mean, listen, at the height of the Cold War, everybody knew, we and the Soviets, but the Soviets were not a major trading partner of the United States. So we're in this amazing position where we are rivals. Our militaries are focusing on each other. That's what the Australia submarine deal is all about, right? But at the same time, China is our largest source of imports. I heard yesterday, there's 96 ships, off Long Beach, California, with your Christmas presents, Megan, waiting to unload. Our economies are in many ways intertwined. By the way, the ships come in full, they return to China empty. That's part of the challenge for us, right? That's what we have to, it is much more complicated than saying, our strategic enemy is the Soviet Union, and we and all of our allies need to do everything we can and oppose the Soviet Union and its allies in the Warsaw Pact. This is way more complicated than that. And it's going to take all of our brain power to figure it out.
So one thing that you concentrated a lot on during your career at the U.S. State Department was free trade agreements. Can you talk a little bit about the future or the status or the state of free trade agreements? We all know what happened with TPP, with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They kind of went ahead without the United States.
Well, that's where World Affairs Councils come in. We need to talk to people about trade agreements and what they really are about. I think they're hugely important, and we have both U.S. parties opposed to trade. If part of our strategy in dealing with China has to be rules-based trade agreements, and that's what TPP was all about. TPP continues, by the way. We had in Atlanta yesterday, we had the British Minister of Trade Policy spoke. In the UK, Great Britain wants to join TPP, right? It is starting negotiations. I don't know that it will happen because I don't think there's political support for it, but I would love to see the United States rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because it is an agreement that includes Japan, includes Vietnam, includes Australia, New Zealand, Brunei. God, that's where you want to be. That's where you want to be. And I'll go back to India. We need India. We need to start, in incremental steps, start dealing with India both on trade issues, but also with India on defense issues. That's got to be key. We need to work with our allies. That's what the Biden administration has been doing. We've been working with our allies. We need to lead our allies. That's the issue. That's what we need to do. And yes, trade is important. Trade agreements are important. And Americans need to understand what trade is. And I'm going to give you the real quick answer: trade. Because we all see these little charts in the newspaper, right? You see them online, Germany's trade with Argentina, US trade with China. And people think that the US trades with China. We don't. US businesses trade with Chinese businesses, right? It's two willing partners making an agreement to buy and sell stuff. It's like Connecticut trading with California, right? You don't keep track of that. But anyhow, that's what trade is. And what trade agreements do is they set up the rules for US businesses to trade with Japanese businesses and Japanese businesses to trade with US businesses. They try to remove the friction, the stuff that slows down the flow of those goods. And everybody talks about tariffs, but tariffs are fairly insignificant unless you impose countervailing duties and special tariffs, which I think are a terrible thing to do. And trade, we all think that trade is stuff that goes in boxes on a loading dock, right? And trade is financial services. Trade is education. Trade is Game of Thrones, right? That's trade. It's intellectual property being sold around the world. And it's huge. And that's our advantage. It is where we do real well. But the rules for trade were written in the time when trade was stuff that went into boxes and got loaded onto trucks and taken to the port. And so how do you make that happen? How do you facilitate that? And that's going to be a huge challenge.
So I'm going to have the audience indulge us, and we're going to move on in a second to talk a little bit about your time at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. But before we do, when we're looking at the overall landscape of foreign policy, what's your biggest sort of caution for the future? What are the things we really sort of need to look out for, and how can we use that as a caution for how we lead in the world?
Well, we talked about it a little bit, a couple of things. I actually wrote some notes because I was hoping you would ask me this. Number one, it's time to worry about the United States and worry about U.S. democracy. Number two is, and we were talking about this before we turned on the cameras, is we think of culture as what other countries have, right? It's why the French aren't like us. It's why, Venezuelans aren't like us. But it's also us. Our culture prevents us from understanding the world. Our culture is a barrier, and we need to somehow understand the world better, and that's what World Affairs Councils do, and that's why I'm delighted to talk to you, and delighted we've got some people listening to this. We need to rejoin TPP. We need to build stronger alliances in Asia. We need to strengthen our relationship with Mexico and Canada, two countries we have treated terribly, who are our number one, Canada, and number two, Mexico, largest export markets, Canada and Mexico. We export 10 times as much to Canada with 35 million people as we do to China that has 1.4 billion people. And we need to focus on India. And so that's what I think we need to do. How's that?
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, if you don't mind, I want to talk to you a little as you're getting ready to sort of move on from being the president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And you've been there for about 7 years, right?
7 years and a couple of months. Yeah.
So when you left the U.S. State Department, and you could have done so many things. Why did you decide to run the World Affairs Council of Atlanta?
Well, first of all, I went to San Diego first for 3 years at the University of California, San Diego, and ran a think tank there. And then this job came open. And first of all, I needed a job, right? You got to work. So I love Atlanta, and I wanted to come home to Atlanta, my hometown. And I wanted to get out of Washington. There's a whole bunch of retirees, State Department, intelligence agency, Defense Department retirees who live in Washington, and just live off contracts with Defense Department or who Treasury, whatever it may be. And I just didn't want to do that. I just did not want to, be part of that Washington crowd. And I think what we do, what you do in Connecticut is so important, is to talk to ordinary citizens, not to university students, but to your mom's next door neighbor, and explain these issues to your mom's next door neighbor in a way that she can understand this. Because that's always been the hurdle that State Department people, in Washington, bureaucrats in general have been unable to do, is explain why what they're doing is important to individual citizens, to ordinary citizens. And that's what World Affairs Councils do. So I got to tell you, you in Connecticut, Megan, you had Fiona Hill speak, and then I got her to speak in Atlanta. And she, unprompted by me, she just said at the end of the program, she said, I have to tell you how wonderful World Affairs Councils are, and the great work that you do, and how impressed I am by what they do around the country. And I think that's certainly true. I just think that's absolutely right. What we do is important, and I appreciate every time I get anybody in the audience, because it means that, people have turned off YouTube and are in TikTok and are actually, listening to you and the great speakers that you get at the World Affairs Council of Connecticut.
So when you're looking back at the years at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, is there an initiative? Is there something that really stands out? Is there a favorite speaker that you've had? What are you going to remember the most?
Okay. So my favorite speaker is always the last one, because I love them all. I just think they're great. Every time I think so-and-so is the best speaker, then the next speaker was the best speaker. So the best speaker I've ever had was the British Minister of Trade, Penny Morton, yesterday. So how's that? I will say this, in the past 7-8 months, and I'm really proud of this, we've had major programs on Russia with Fiona Hill, Germany with Constanze Stelzenmuller. We had the immediate past U.S. Ambassador to India talking about India. We had David Riddy, who is the Economist magazine Beijing correspondent, talking about China. And if you want to understand China, it's on that is on our YouTube channel. Y'all should watch that. It'll change what you think you know about China. I love that. The cultural programs are the most fun programs. We did a wine tasting on Monday night with German wine, where we got a guy who selected the wine, and it was great fun, and it was in person. We had List Alfonso dance Cuba, which was this Cuban dance troupe that we brought to, and we filled this theater in downtown. It was great. We had Patty Hittich, who is, you may know her from PBS. She's got a Cooking with Patty. She's a Mexican chef. We brought her to Atlanta, and she supervised a meal in a restaurant that was just extraordinary. We had a program last week on K-pop, and this K-pop,
I was at that one.
K-drama and K-food equal K-power. And it was great fun. I loved it, and I learned so much from it. So that's, you asked me what I like. I like my last program. I love my cultural programs. I love making this fun. And then finally is I've taken from Atlanta probably 8-9 trips to Cuba that I hope we can resume. And that's just been great, because there's so much that we all can learn by going to Cuba, because both the left and the right are wrong about Cuba, as far as I'm concerned. Everything is more complicated. I think I said that. This is more complicated than you think it is. And when you go there, it's like such an eye opener. And it's fun. It's fun. But it is an eye opener to see this country that is just, it gives bad governance it takes it to a level that you cannot imagine. And anyhow, it is fun to see, interesting to see, educational.
I have been twice, and I agree. So I haven't been as many times as you have, but twice. And it everything is complicated. Everything, it really challenges your brain in so many ways.
Well, and here's this country that still uses the economic model of the Soviet Union. And so it's like visiting the Soviet Union, but with friendly people who speak Spanish that, lots of Americans speak and are willing to tell you about what they're experiencing, unlike going to the Soviet Union. They're willing to talk about it. And so it's really, I find really, really insightful. And I will say this, is that I think when I was at school, we all had to study communism in the Soviet Union. People under 40 and maybe under 35, I don't know, have been fortunate enough they don't have to worry about the Soviet Union anymore. They don't study communism. And here it is, still like a little museum piece in Cuba. Here's how you ruin your economy. Here's how you take smart people and make them have an equality of poverty, right? So everybody's poor.
So let me ask, before I ask you your next question, Gwen, I see your question about where you can find that program on China. It is on the World Affairs Council of Atlanta YouTube page, and we'll try to get a link up in the chat for you. So do you want to talk a little bit or briefly about what's next?
Oh, I don't know. I've got to figure it out. I'm not sure. I've got a business that was asking me about doing some consulting. I may do that. I want to do a lot of traveling, and I don't know if I can say this on a YouTube. I think I'm about to get married, so
So your partner is wonderful. She is just amazing, and so that's very exciting news.
So I want to spend time with her. How's that?
She's wonderful. I love that
answer.
Yeah. So as we close, let me ask you two questions. The first is, what's your greatest fear for the future?
The United States. And my greatest hope for the future, which is your second question, is the United States. I mean, seriously, is that we need to think about us. we need to think, we have all been raised. Every time I hear anybody say, the leader of the free world, it makes me ill that the president of the United States is the leader of the free world, because that's BS left over from the Cold War. And it's not something that's automatic. It's not, and I've heard Republicans, Democrats say that, the Obama people said it, the Trump people said it, I'm sure the Biden people are saying it. And, it's like that's us, that it comes without any effort. It does not come without effort. The United States led the free world, whatever that means, after World War II, because we worked real hard at it, and we did it in a bipartisan way. It's not to say that Republicans, Democrats didn't disagree, because they did. But we figured out this is our geopolitical place in the world. Here's our strategy. Here's what we need to implement it. And we worked on it really hard. Now, that's the past. We need to figure out what is our place in the world. Do we, I'll tell you, we need allies. We need our allies more than ever, as our GDP relative to China's GDP. It's not that we're getting poorer, we're getting richer. Our economy's growing, but their economy's growing faster, right? That's going to be a challenge for us. And how do we deal with that? And then, you've got all the myriad of problems around the world. And you've got the crazy, I shouldn't say that. You've got the Russian Federation continuing, for a whole bunch of reasons, unhappy with its place in the world and blaming it on us. And that has all kinds of repercussions that we need to deal with. I mean, it's never going to be a superpower again. I mean, the Russian economy is slightly larger than Italy. I mean, so you got to keep that in mind. The Russian economy is slightly larger than Italy. Anyhow, so I mean, they're not going to be a superpower, but they're a pretty important mid-sized power that can cause a lot of trouble in the world. And as we shift to Asia, it makes Germany more important within NATO, in this new government in Germany more important. And we need to figure out how. We're not used to doing that, because we've always been in the driver's seat, where anywhere in the world, we're the guys who are going to solve everything. We need to count more on Germany, count more on NATO. And having spoken with the British minister yesterday, I mean, what is Britain's place in the world now? That they've left the EU, and they want to, exert themselves more on the world, as she says, as a force for good. Well, how do we use that force for good? Make sure we're heading in the same direction. There you go. How's that?
That's fantastic. Charles, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your insight, and your expertise. But most of all, thank you so much for being such a wonderful colleague, and it's been an honor to call you a counterpart. And we'll have you on again, but I can't thank you enough for your leadership and everything that you've done for the World Affairs Council Network.
Megan, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. I've enjoyed getting to know our counterparts around the country and all the various World Affairs Councils. And I just think that's been terrific. It's something I've enjoyed thoroughly. And I got to say one more thing is an older guy. One of the things I love about my job here that I have loved is working with all these really smart young people and I know you have the same thing on your staff, your interns, your graduate assistants that work with you. I mean, I have populated businesses all over Atlanta with alumni of the World Affairs Council. And it's so great. That's so rewarding to see. And I just love that. And I love when we go to these conferences, meeting all the people from our network. It's been great fun. So, and part of that is becoming good friends with you, Megan. So I want to thank you and thank you to the members of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut and everybody who is patient enough to watch this and listen to me ramble.
Well, you can see it again. We'll be posting it on our YouTube and on our podcast. So subscribe wherever you get your podcast to State of the World. But Charles, thank you so much. A happy new year to you and happy holidays to everyone who's listening. And we'll see you in 22.
Cool. That's great. Thanks. Bye-bye.